When did you come to this project, and what was your reaction when you saw all the elements at play?
Well, I came to this project originally on Ballet Russe. Dan and Dayna were making Ballet Russe, and they asked me to come in and assist them. During that process, they said to me, "How does this sound as an idea?" And I said, "Well, that's a pretty amazing idea. How are you going to do that?"
In 1998, you can see that last quote, "En la boca cerrada no entran moscas." We were down in 1998 doing nothing related to this movie. A friend of ours had received a National Science Foundation grant to make an interactive curriculum for middle school kids on evolution and natural selection. And it had a video component, like little clips that you would roll over to see if there's an adaptive trait in the species. And our friend Doug hired me to do the camera work and Dayna to do the sound. Normally we just do it for ourselves, but when a friend calls up and says, "Hey, would you work for me and come to the Galapagos and get paid?" It's like, sure, it's a great gig. But we weren't aware of human habitation on Galapagos at all and had no idea about this story particularly until Dayna, who is a phenomenally avid reader, reached up onto the bookshelf behind that little dining table in the dining area of our small boat and pulled off one of all of 4 books on that shelf. And then I saw her jaw drop, and I thought, what did you just find?
In this book, it was called The Enchanted Islands, and it's a book that's about the human history of the islands. And it was just shocking to me that there was enough human history of the Galapagos Islands to fill a book, because there's no indigenous people there. But as you see in this film, people started coming, and most of them started coming in the 20s and 30s, and most of them were Europeans, even though the islands are actually owned by Ecuador. So I flipped open this book and started thumbing through it, and the 3rd or 4th chapter was called Murder in Paradise. And what Dan...
Talk about bearing the lead.
It was completely buried. What Dan was kind enough not to share, but I will now out myself. My my sort of dirty secret is that I love true crime. And so, you know, it was this 1-2 punch of, wow, there are people that live here. There's enough of a history that there's a book on it. And there's this 12-page episode that, like, literally every sentence in this 12 pages was so dynamic. And you saw how colorful these characters are. I couldn't believe they actually existed. And so I said, Dan, you got to read this chapter. And then at that moment, our incredible naturalist guide who lives on the islands and has since become a friend, but he turned to us and he said, well, you know, the old lady, which is what he called Margaret Wittmer, the old lady's still alive. And at that moment, I became determined to stop on this island of Floriana during our 2-week journey down there. And we were lucky enough to have tea and cookies with Margaret. But Miguel, our guide, said, I'm very good friends with her, and if you, Dayna, I know it's going to be right on the tip of your tongue the whole time we're in her presence to ask her about what went on and who did what to whom, and if you do, I will kill you. And he carefully seated himself right next to me.
With a knife.
Exactly. No. His gun was hidden. And he glared at me every time I opened my mouth. So I kind of didn't ever say anything, and we just kept Margaret talking, and mostly what she talked about in those days, which were only a couple of years before she passed away, were things like the famous people like, you know, Roosevelt, who had visited the island, and what she had done. And I mean, she really had become the queen of Floriana by that point. She had completely taken over the Baroness's role.
Then you had the most astounding luck of finding this footage, shot, by the way, by Alan Hancock, for whom Hancock Park is named, the oil man. So here's definitely a local connection.
It's a stroke of luck.
The second Eureka moment.
Another massive stroke of luck. And in documentary films especially, so much depends on happenstance, coincidence. And in this case, the same friend, Doug Weinuck, was starting another science education project, working with a professor at USC, who's now in Arkansas, Bill McComas. And Bill also was enamored of Galapagos, had taken students down on trips, natural history trips, and he was the one who told Doug, who told us, about the archive in Doheny Library that was, for lack of funding, falling apart. It contained all of the 5 years' worth of Captain Alan Hancock's explorations down the coast of the Americas, past Galapagos to the Marquesas, with the Galapagos human histories capturing his attention once this Ritter-Strauss story began to develop. And we approached the archive. And Melinda Hayes, the archivist, knew that we would be treating the material kindly, and she worked to get us the exclusive rights to that footage in exchange for giving them a copy. And we coaxed through the telecine as much as we could, which is every frame of which is on screen there. But as each reel began to spool out, slowly but surely, we realized that we had a gold mine on our hands.
The roles were so wonderful and the story is so fantastic. And one of the things, you know, they had already met Kate, and we talked about what part Kate should play. And then, of course, once you have Kate, that helps you enormously. But we wanted to get other, you know, European actors and people that were the right ethnicity for each of the roles. And it was just so much fun to get on the phone with the agents and pitch this story, you know, time and time again, because people were astounded.
It was quite a coincidence through a connection of Ballet Russe, who this man was then still the exec director of the Sydney Theatre Company. And so when Kate was coming over to shoot Blue Jasmine in San Francisco, where we're based, he connected the two of us. We hit it off right away with Kate, with her husband Andrew, with the 3 young boys. We just had a great time across that month. Kate saw the movie, a rough cut. And Dayna and I decided at that point with this new friendship, we didn't want to impose on the friendship. Turns out later, neither did Kate want to impose on us to say, I'll take a role. So we thought, well, we're doing this for the friendship, and we let it go. When we met Margie for the first time, we came down to her house, and she heard that we knew Kate. The words were, you two are idiots if you don't go back to your friend, arguably one of the greatest actresses in the world, and ask her to do the role. So, I mean, and that's what really prodded us to go back and get her.
It's not just having the ideas, it's prodding everybody along and talking people into things and you know, and figuring out, you know, how to pull something together. The other thing is that I'm very conscious of the fact, and I had worked on one other documentary, Into the Arms of Strangers, that actually won the Oscar, to help them find the narrator, is that the higher profile people you can get connected, you know, it's hard for these films to find audiences, and you want it to have a life, so you try to sort of amp it up. The actors really all were fantastic and really, really into it.